we're going to be doing some inking fish, and one of the first things to do is to begin with your piece of paper and to draw out a Scarpace style fish. So like we did last time when we were drawing our observation drawings of fish, we are going to use shapes. So starting with a sort of circular shape in the middle is what I'm going to do. I'm doing it quite lightly, please do it lightly. I might go slightly darker so you can see it, but always light when you're drawing. And the reason I've gone for a bit of a circle is because I want to build up this sort of shape here and then add on mouth and top and bottom fin and tail, okay? So that's the reason I've gone for that sort of shape to start with. You could maybe go for something a bit longer if you want to. And make sure you're doing it big enough to fit all on your page as well, that's important. So I'm just going to start to build in around this object a mouth shape. I'm going to build in a top fin. I'm going to build in a bottom fin. And if you think about it, these fins, if you weren't sure on drawing it to start with, you can think about how they're triangles, a slightly more squashed triangle. And the tail, for instance, you could in your mind start to think, or even draw on because you can rub them out, the triangle shape first, and then you could start to connect it up and build it in like this, okay? So that's your main shape done. The next thing to do is to start to think about features and any areas you would like to be split up into slightly different sections of colours. So I'm going to start by drawing an eye, and I want my eye to be really nice and large, like some of Scarpace's work. He has sometimes quite a large eye on his work like this. So I'm going to start by drawing a large eye. You can draw around something if it helps, like a water pot, or you can just go for it. I'm going to leave an area that I'm going to leave blank for a shine. And then I'm just going to put another line around here that I can also try and leave blank when I'm inking to build up the different sections. The next thing I want to do as well is I would like to have an area here that I keep a slightly different colour and an area of the fin at the top that I keep a slightly different colour. So I'm just going to section those off as well. Okay, so that should take you about 10 minutes to make sure that you've got everything ready like that. Now, the next thing to do is to start to add ink. So you will find that you need a water pot, you will need a sponge maybe, a couple of sponges. This one's quite useful for moving the water around a bit more accurately. You might need a paintbrush to do the same thing, and then you will need some inks. And you'll find on your table you have about 3 different colours of inks. If you would like a slightly different colour, just pop your hand up and ask. Don't get out your seat, please. So I'm going to go with the 3 primary colours, a red, a yellow and a blue, okay, to start off today. And I think the way I want to plan this is I want a warm section in the middle and then 2 cooler sections on these areas here. So let's start with this warm section in the middle, avoiding the eye, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to colour this with fine line in completely black. So I don't need to put ink on any of this bit. I would like that bit to be white and I want the shine to be white as well. So I'm going to get my sponge and I'm going to dip it in the water, okay, and just squeeze it out. So I don't have, the sponge is wet, it's damp, but it's not got loads of water to spread. Because what can happen, I'm just dripping up a bit there, what can happen is you can find that you can't move your work at the end of the lesson to the drying rack, so you can't use too much water, that's really important. If, like I just did, you have any drips, you can just mop them up with your tissue. So, let's start to use the sponge to just dampen the paper accurately in the sections that we would like to build water in. If you're really struggling with the sponge, you can straight away begin to use a paintbrush to add the water. The thing with the paintbrush is you have to work quite quickly because it won't put as much water on as the sponge, and you don't want it to be, so I'll go back to the sponge to show you, you don't want it to be not wet enough when you come to add the ink in a minute. And that's the other reason why I'm adding sections, just to make sure that I have enough areas to put my ink without it drying up before I get to the end of it. So I should have now a nice damp area just in this section here to start adding ink to. And I said I was going to go for warm, so I'm going to start with red, the darker colour, in the corner here. I'm going to just add some ink to this section here, okay? Now, you don't have to just add ink at this point, you can use your paintbrush to help you, but what I would do to start with is start to build the ink on and see what happens, because it looks best when it spreads itself, okay? So you can even, don't add too much ink, but you can even add the ink to try and spread the other colours of ink, okay, around. I'm going to go for a bit more red up here, so it's almost like the extremities where it goes to its extreme edges, I'm putting the red ink. But it will look really nice just in the way it flows. Now if I want to, I don't want to mix all the colours together because I do want it to look like it's flowed into another bit of the colour. You can start to add a bit of water just to move the ink around slightly. Again, I'm trying to avoid this bit here because I want that to be nice and I want that to be white, black and white again. So I'm totally going to avoid that because I can add that with pen. So this tool here, you can use like a sponge again and just move the ink around slightly if you want to, but you don't need that tool, it works the same as a paintbrush. Now, when I'm adding my next two sections, we need to start to think about how we can make sure the ink does not go into the cold sections, because I would like to keep it so I've got a warm section and a cold section. So if your teacher wants to pause the video now and maybe if anyone has any answers for me as to how we get just the cold sections of colour in this area here and not bleeding into this section, then they can do that now and think about that. So you might want to pause the video and just see if anyone can give me an answer before I show you on how we can make sure the colours don't overlap or bleed into one another. Okay? Right, so that's the warm bit done. So the next thing, and some of you might have figured this out, is we are going to add the cold areas. So I'm going to do this with the sponge again, because my sponge has got no colour on it, so I can go straight into the water again. You might want to replace the water if it's gone a little bit warm, but mine should be okay. The blue will cover it up, I'm sure. So I'm going to start to build in the water, and what you might have figured out and what you can see I'm doing, I'm leaving a slight gap between them. I'll show you what happens if you don't in a moment, but I'm going to show you on this one how to do it correctly. So leave a slight gap, and if they do merge together a little bit, it will look quite interesting anyway, so don't worry if you feel like it's not gone quite right. I've got a green here, I'm just going to see if I can use the green as well. I think it's blocked up. An ultramarine might be quite nice, sort of a darker blue into a lighter blue. So we've got the blue there, letting that spread out into your lighter blue here. And I'd like some of these areas here to go into a really light colour, so I'm going to sort of leave it quite light around here and see if I can push the ink up to there. So I'm going to just push it up as far as I can without letting it bleed into this bit by leaving a bit of a gap. But if you do let it go into there, it will just look quite interesting, and we'll see what happens with it. But if you have a plan and you don't want it to mix, then you must make sure you're doing this carefully. So I'm going to leave some of these areas light and white because I really like the idea of that. And I'm going to lead into a really nice ultramarine, that dark blue again, because I think it might look nice to have it balanced between here and here. Okay, and use my paintbrush again just to keep that edge sharp, because you can really merge the ink in and get that edge really nice and sharp as it goes round like that. Okay, so that's it done how I'd like it to be done. But if you make a mistake, this might happen, and that's okay because it might look quite interesting. So again, I'm just going to use my paintbrush quickly. I'm going to wet this area here so I can lay the ink on, and I've accidentally gone over and it started to bleed in. And I actually did that by accident. I didn't mean to do that as quickly as I did, but as I said, I can pretend that that was on purpose. So I'm going to build up the ink, the water down here, and it's bled in a little bit. Don't panic, just think, right, well this one might turn out a little bit purple, maybe with the blue and the red, and let's see how this one goes. So adding a little bit of blue to it, and just merging it down, and it will always come out quite nicely. The one exception to this, it's going a bit green actually, because it's got a bit of yellow pigment in this red rather than it being that sort of bluey, purpley red pigment. Crimson we call it. So the thing is, it can go wrong if you mix too many of these colours together, particularly the three primary colours, and that's why we're trying to avoid this. It will make a sort of brown colour, and it doesn't look as nice when you're inking and it's gone a bit brown, so please do try and avoid that. So then you'll find that by the end of the lesson you've got some really exciting areas of ink, okay? And the last thing to sort of show you, if you do get to this or if you do want to do this, is you could potentially start putting maybe a tiny bit of ink on just to balance it and see where it goes, see what happens, because Scarpace really doesn't sort of limit it to hot and cold colours. I just think that sometimes it can look quite nice to do that, but if you want to maybe add some different colours in at the end, you can do. Again, we don't want to do too much, we don't want it to go brown, but it might be that you just want to let it settle in certain areas to get some quite exciting results, okay? And I've left this bit because I'm going to keep that like a ring of white with the dark area in it, just like this idea that I've got from Scarpace's own works. That's why I don't need to add much ink to that, okay? So, that's that. finishing it off, make sure there's not too much water on so you can now move it to a dry rack at the end of the lesson. And that is your inked fish first stage done.